Imagine you're standing inside an ancient, silent tomb. The beam of your flashlight illuminates the legendary golden mask, whose dazzling beauty conceals a terrifying secret that no Egyptian ancestor ever wanted unveiled. Beneath those burial wrappings lies the mummy of a young king, a boy worshipped as a god, yet taken by life in the most insidious way. Not by war, not by epidemic, but by the very blood that gave him life. This young pharaoh was the culmination of centuries of inbred unions, with parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents all siblings. They believed royal blood was sacred and could never be mixed with commoners. Unaware of genetics, they stubbornly maintained a supposedly pure bloodline, a purity that slowly poisoned children from within. The boy grew up in a gilded palace, revered as the son of deities. Yet his body bore the living proof of inbreeding's horror. A twisted spine caused pain with every movement. A misaligned jaw made basic eating agonizing. By age 16, while other youths played or trained for battle, he needed a cane to laboriously walk through palace corridors. Servants whispered about a curse of sacred blood. But the harsh truth was far bleaker. It wasn't divine wrath, but the direct consequence of repeated sibling marriages across generations. He knew nothing of recessive genes or mutation. All he knew was that every breath was a battle with his own body. In the eyes of ancient Egyptians, he embodied the god Horus. In reality, he was a victim of a centuries-long mistake, a tragedy collectively manufactured by an entire civilization. And the most chilling part, nobody paused to question. To the ancient Egyptians, pharaohs were more than kings, they were divine incarnations, bridges between humanity and the divine. Thus their blood was deemed inviolable, holy blood that could not be tainted by common lineage. This belief didn't fade, it hardened into royal law. To preserve this sacred purity, pharaohs repeatedly practiced the modern taboo, marrying their full siblings. These inbred unions were not accidental, they were deliberate, sacred duties. Upon ascending the throne, a pharaoh's first task was naming his great royal wife, often his sister, because only someone who shared identical blood could legitimately give birth to divine heirs. Initially, the consequences might have been subtle, early generations still produced healthy children. But recessive genes don't vanish, they linger, waiting. When two carriers, like siblings, combine their genes, defects erupt. Over time, disabilities, compromised immunity, and hereditary diseases emerged and worsened. Children born of these holy marriages appeared divine, but their bodies paid a cruel toll. Some died in infancy, others survived into adolescence only to endure excruciating suffering. Those who inherited the throne frequently needed canes, crutches, even bedridden existence, sick gods in gilded palaces. The belief in sacred blood was not only upheld by tradition, it was reinforced by religion and art. Paintings, statues, hymns, all idolized royal lineage as a sacred, untouchable symbol. Any deviation, romance with an outsider, marriage beyond the clan, was interpreted as an insult to the gods. They had no concept of DNA. They didn't comprehend mutation. Yet their insistence on maintaining a pure bloodline inadvertently created an unending genetic nightmare, irreversible tragedy in slow motion. While temples and monuments glorified pharaohs, underground and beneath the sands lay graves of children who never lived a full life, born too close. From the outside, ancient Egypt seemed majestic, monumental pyramids, enigmatic sphinxes, golden temples, exquisite art. But beneath that splendor lay a dangerous religious fanaticism, a blind worship whose consequences were etched into the very blood of the rulers. Signs of genetic illness, physical deformities, facial anomalies, infertility, infant mortality, and modern eyes are red flags of biological failure. Yet to ancient Egyptians, they were seen as divine signs. A pharaoh with unusual features? Not less powerful, seen as chosen by gods. Who else but gods could produce a body so other? When a royal child died young, priests didn't ask biological questions. Instead, they praised that the child had returned to the divine, fulfilling a sacred mission. A grieving queen's sorrow was soothed with ceremony, prophecy, chanting. But biological suffering persisted, silently and mercilessly. Religion didn't merely allow it, it collaborated with power to sustain the cycle. Priests oversaw royal lineage, managed weddings, wrote history favoring the dynasty. If a pharaoh married his sister, they called it a divine union of Isis and Osiris. If the king died childless, they framed it as a holy sacrifice. No mention of the real cause, inbreeding gradually destroying them. The fear of losing purity made rulers sacrifice future generations for an illusion. And the cruelest irony, no one opposed it. Citizens were taught the king was God. Priests used faith to fortify rule. The royal family was trapped in a golden cage of unbreakable tradition. This blind devotion cost not just individual lives, but the gradual demise of entire dynasties. Gilded appearances could not mask the rot at the core, where children were born not for the future, but for an obsolete idea of divine purity. The statues and reliefs of Akhenaten continue to astonish modern scholars. They depict an unusual body, an abnormally elongated skull, gaunt face, protruding belly, wide hips, and even breasts like a woman's. By today's standards, one might suspect a hormonal disorder or a rare genetic syndrome. But at the time, it carried a deeper meaning. Akhenaten chose to display his deformities to his subjects, unlike previous kings who concealed theirs. Why would a king do that? Perhaps because he understood what earlier dynasties had avoided: the royal bloodline was rotting. Akhenaten was the result of generations of inbreeding and may have been the first to feel the consequences in every cell of his body. Rather than disguise it, he confronted it. And from that realization, he launched the greatest religious reform in ancient Egyptian history, abolishing the entire pantheon of traditional gods and worshipping a single deity, the sun god Aten. To Akhenaten, the old gods, Ammonius, Osiris, Horus, were no longer worthy. Under their protection, the royal house had weakened, and deformities worsened. Perhaps he believed these gods had cursed his lineage. So he created a new faith, hoping the pure light of Aten could erase the genetic curse. He went further by building a new capital, Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna, where all art served truth. The royal family was no longer portrayed as divine, but as ordinary humans, playing with children, eating, laughing, and visibly deformed. It was not just a religious rebellion, but a visual confession of a dynasty decaying from within. Though after his death, everything was erased, monuments destroyed, the old gods restored, Akhenaten's legacy endured, a rare moment when truth was spoken amid centuries of deified lies. In the Egyptian desert, beneath millions of tons of sand and time, lay a small tomb long forgotten. But when it was unearthed in 1922, the world was stunned. The dazzling beauty of the golden mask, luxurious artifacts, and divine statues evoked the image of a youthful, glorious king, Tutankhamun. But behind that splendor lay a cold and cruel genetic tragedy. Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten and his own sister. From birth, he bore severe deformities, clubfoot, scoliosis, and an immune system so weak that even a mild illness could be fatal. Modern medical examinations revealed numerous signs of genetic degeneration, direct consequences of prolonged inbreeding within the royal family. Tutankhamun could not walk unaided and needed over 130 canes, many of which were buried with him. To the ancient Egyptians, the cane was a symbol of power. But to Tutankhamun, it was a medical necessity that allowed him to take each painful step inside the palace. As a teenager, the young king married his full sister, an act believed to preserve the divine bloodline, but in truth, only deepened the tragedy. The two children they conceived died at birth. The mummified fetuses were found in his tomb, lying silently in tiny coffins as haunting proof of the genetic curse. Tutankhamun died at 19, just as life was beginning. DNA analysis revealed he had malaria, but the cause of death was not just illness, it was a body too fragile to fight anything. Some theories suggest he died from a fall, but his brittle bones made any accident potentially fatal. Tutankhamun left no major political mark in Egyptian history. But his death remains the harshest lesson about the blindness of power, when a divine bloodline becomes the very poison that kills a dynasty. Amid the layers of gold and ancient incense, his life whispers a bitter truth from history: no one can defy the laws of nature, not even those called gods. When Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE, his vast empire quickly fell into the hands of his generals. In Egypt, one of them, Ptolemy, Alexander's close companion, declared himself pharaoh and founded a new dynasty, the Ptolemaic kingdom. Though Greek by origin, Ptolemy and his descendants didn't reject the traditions of native pharaohs. Instead, they adopted one of ancient Egypt's most frightening legacies, inbreeding to protect power and royal blood. For nearly 300 years, Macedonian Greek rulers governed Egypt, and most married their sisters. This was not just a political ritual, but a declaration. They were the legitimate, sacred heirs of past pharaohs. To them, royal blood could not mix with commoners, and the throne belonged only to those of the same lineage. But the cost of genetic purity continued to sow biological decline. As time went on, Ptolemaic kings showed increasing signs of instability, from losing governing ability to mental illness and physical frailty. In the quiet shadows of Alexandria's palaces, a new cycle of tragedy was silently repeating itself. Amid a dynasty marked by decay, one name still resonates today: Cleopatra VII, the last queen of ancient Egypt. Many refer to Cleopatra as a symbol of deadly beauty, but historical records emphasize that her true weapon was intelligence and wisdom. She spoke at least 7 languages and ruled with sharp political acumen, skillfully negotiating with both Caesar and Mark Antony. Yet, Cleopatra herself was not immune to the cycle of incest. She married her 2 younger brothers, following the Ptolemaic royal tradition. There are no clear records of offspring from these marriages, but it's likely that genetics played a role in the end of her lineage. After Cleopatra's death and Egypt's defeat by the Roman Empire, the kingdom ceased to be independent and became a Roman province. Cleopatra was the final flickering light in a dynasty rotting from its own obsession with pure blood. Beneath the golden surface and romantic legend, her story and that of the Ptolemaic dynasty serve as a stark reminder: power maintained through genetic inheritance is never immortal. It's merely a fragile mask concealing internal decay. Throughout over 3,000 years of history, ancient Egypt is remembered not only for its magnificent pyramids, sacred deities, and intricate hieroglyphics, but also for a hauntingly repeated pattern: genetic degeneration from incestuous marriages. This did not happen once, but 3 times Egypt plunged into this tragic cycle, beginning with extreme inbreeding, where royal family members married siblings, followed by severe genetic consequences such as deformities, infertility, or premature death, and finally, a forced shift toward marrying outsiders to rescue the bloodline. When improvements occurred, the cycle restarted. The first instance occurred during the Old Kingdom, the era of iconic pyramid building, such as Giza. Many pharaohs of this period are known to have married their sisters, though medical knowledge at the time did not grasp the genetic risks. Some died young or left no male heirs, leading to political crises. The second happened during the Amarna period, featuring figures like Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. This is one of the most thoroughly studied eras thanks to modern DNA analysis. Scientists uncovered severely mutated gene sequences due to generations of inbreeding. Tutankhamun, the child of full siblings, suffered multiple illnesses and died at just 19. The third cycle unfolded in the Ptolemaic dynasty, where Greek rulers of Macedonian descent like Cleopatra adopted Egyptian-style incestuous marriage to legitimize their rule. Over 3 centuries, nearly all Ptolemaic kings married their sisters. Though of Western origin, they repeated the ancient mistakes of their native predecessors. This pattern was no accident but a direct result of worshipping this sacred bloodline. To pharaohs, power wasn't just political or military, it came from proving divine descent, something they believed could only be preserved by avoiding common blood. But this obsession birthed a genetic doom loop. Power linked to inbreeding caused deformities weakened the dynasty, weakness led to change, then back to inbreeding. Ancient Egypt may have reached cultural and architectural immortality, but biologically, it proved a harsh truth: no bloodline is so sacred that it escapes the unforgiving laws of genetics. When we envision ancient pharaohs, we see grandeur, golden thrones, lavish rituals, towering monuments. But behind this splendor were silent sufferings, wounds not visible on the skin but etched deeply into their souls and lives. Physical deformities from incest were just the surface. The real cost was a stolen childhood and life. From birth, these royals were trapped in rigid frameworks of lineage and ceremony. Taught that their blood was divine, they were forbidden from befriending commoners or loving anyone outside their bloodline. Love, the most basic human emotion, was suffocated in the cage of power and purity. Pharaohs like Tutankhamun likely endured chronic physical pain, clubfoot, fragile bones, immune deficiencies, needing a cane to walk even as a teen. Yet worse was the total isolation. A teenager forced to marry his sister. Their 2 children, if born, died young. No close friends. No real love. Just arranged marriages and the looming fear of an early death like their ancestors. Even a gold-plated palace became a genetic prison. Stone walls and ornate thrones couldn't hide the truth. They were victims of the very myth their ancestors built. A royal child had no choice of their path. Destiny was already written in their genes. Many scholars believe some royals suffered cognitive issues, genetic syndromes, mild intellectual disabilities, or emotional disorders. But they were neither treated nor understood. Their strange behaviors were seen as signs of the divine. In reality, they were silent cries from children trapped within their own bodies and bloodlines. Inbreeding does not merely weaken the body, it erodes the soul. And while history celebrates the pharaohs with their grand names, we must never forget that behind those golden crowns were small, lonely, and suffering human beings, turned into symbols, yet never truly allowed to live as full people. For thousands of years, Egypt's dynasties believed that their sacred power came from a pure bloodline. They did not marry outsiders but took sisters, nieces, and daughters from within the family as wives. This was not only a political strategy but a religious conviction that only those carrying divine blood were worthy of ruling. But today, with the advancement of genetic science, we have precise and painful answers. Thanks to modern DNA analysis technology, researchers have decoded the genomes of several royal mummies, most notably that of the young pharaoh Tutankhamun. The findings reveal Tutankhamun was the child of 2 full siblings, and the abnormalities in his body, from clubfoot, scoliosis, to a weakened immune system, all stemmed from inherited genetic defects. And it wasn't just Tutankhamun. Many other pharaohs have been identified as products of multiple generations of inbreeding, resulting in the accumulation of dangerous mutations. What was once interpreted as divine will, such as deformities, early death, and infertility, is now explained through the language of science. They were the inevitable consequences of inbreeding. In the ancient world, priests praised purity and regarded royal blood as absolutely sacred. But now we know that genetic diversity is the real foundation of health and life. It is mixing, not isolation, that enables humans to resist disease, develop intelligence, and survive across millions of years of evolution. The story of the pharaohs is a costly warning. It shows how belief, even when seemingly noble, can lead to biological disaster if not grounded in scientific understanding. They lacked no wealth, no power, but were missing the most vital thing, knowledge of their own bodies and genes. Today, as the world faces renewed debates over superior races, noble blood, or preserving heritage, the lessons from ancient Egypt remain strikingly relevant. Science does more than help us understand the past, it lights the way forward, so humanity doesn't repeat deadly mistakes in the name of purity. Thus, Tutankhamun's mummy is not just a historical artifact. It is a genetic mirror, a story of blind pride and generational pain that we must remember and learn from. Buried deep beneath Egypt's burning sands are golden tombs, once the resting places of kings worshipped as gods. They were believed to be the embodiment of Ra, of Horus, the bridge between man and the divine. But as science peels away each linen wrap, deciphers every strand of DNA, and examines every fractured bone, a naked truth emerges: they were not gods, but tragic victims of their own bloodline. Tutankhamun, the most famous pharaoh in the world, died at 19, deformed, frail, surrounded by stillborn children. His father, Akhenaten, the radical who dared challenge the old religion, was also deformed, likely due to recessive traits from generations of inbreeding. These living gods, once cloaked in myth and reverence, are revealed as human pain, isolation, disease, and lonely deaths. It all began with an extreme belief that royal blood must remain untouched. So they preserve purity through sibling marriages, generation after generation, ignoring the consequences. Religion and politics joined forces to defend that vicious cycle. They worshipped gods, but sacrificed their own blood on the altar of power. Yet in their collapse, humanity finds its most precious lesson: never sacrifice real people for an abstract ideal. Do not trade health for tradition. Do not cling to noble blood and forget the value of diversity, love, and compassion. They lived in gilded palaces but were prisoners of history, of divine illusions and the fear of offending the gods. They died, but not in vain. For through each mummy, each inscription on stone, each skull deformity, they speak a priceless truth. That purity does not create greatness, compassion, humility, and empathy for human suffering do. That power without love leads only to rot from within. And that, if anything is worth preserving through generations, it is not blood, but wisdom, compassion, and the will to rise above the errors of the past. These golden tombs are not just resting places. They are warnings carved into stone, demanding that all who enter bow their heads before the raw truth of a civilization that traded humanity for divine illusion.